The gray morning sky hangs heavy over the choppy waters of the English Channel as steel ramps drop into the cold surf on June 6, 1944. The air instantly fills with the deafening roar of artillery and machine gun fire from the cliffs above. Thousands of young men from the United States and the United Kingdom wade through waist-deep water toward the heavily fortified beaches of Normandy. They carry heavy packs and rifles while facing a hail of bullets from the concrete bunkers on the ridge. This is not merely a battle for a stretch of sand, but the beginning of the end for the fortress Europe that has been built by the German forces over 4 long years of occupation. The stakes of this massive amphibious assault could not be higher for the future of human civilization and global democracy. If the Allied forces fail to secure a foothold on the French coast, the grip of totalitarianism will tighten across the continent of Europe. A failure here would mean the prolonging of a conflict that has already claimed millions of lives and displaced countless populations. The vision of a world ruled by the iron fist of the Third Reich looms as a terrifying possibility if the Atlantic Wall remains breached. The liberation of Paris and the eventual defeat of Berlin depend entirely on the success of these brave soldiers on this blood-soaked morning. At the center of this colossal strategic gamble stands General Dwight David Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander of the Expeditionary Force. He is a man of immense responsibility who carries the weight of the free world on his broad shoulders. Eisenhower has spent months overseeing the intricate planning of Operation Overlord, coordinating navies, armies, and air forces from multiple nations. He sits in his headquarters knowing that the order he gave to launch the invasion is now irrevocable. His face is etched with the stress of command as he drafts a letter taking full blame in case the landings end in a catastrophic failure. He is the architect of a liberation that must not fail. The question that haunts every commander and soldier alike is whether the industrial might of the Allies can overcome the entrenched fanaticism of the Axis powers. Can a coalition of democratic nations with differing political ideologies hold together long enough to defeat a common enemy? The war is not just being fought on the beaches of France, but in the skies over London, the frozen steppes of Russia, and the jungle islands of the Pacific. The world holds its breath wondering if the forces of liberty have the strength and resolve to dismantle the machinery of death created by Adolf Hitler and the Japanese Empire. The outcome hangs in a precarious balance. The answer begins to unfold as the Allied troops inch their way up the bluffs of Omaha and Utah, beaches securing a tenuous perimeter. The success of D-Day marks the turning of the tide in the Western theater, but the road to victory remains long and treacherous. This moment is the culmination of a global conflict that began years earlier when the German army smashed across the border into Poland in September 1939. That act of aggression shattered the fragile peace established after the First World War and plunged the globe into a second, even more devastating catastrophe. The world would never be the same again. Flash back to the early days of 1940, when the German war machine seemed unstoppable as it rolled across Western Europe. The tactic known as Blitzkrieg or Lightning War utilized fast-moving tanks and aircraft to overwhelm outdated defensive lines. The French army, which was considered one of the strongest in Europe, collapsed in a matter of weeks, leaving the British Expeditionary Force stranded at Dunkirk. It was a moment of profound shock for the international community as the swastika flag was raised over the Eiffel Tower in Paris. The fall of France left the United Kingdom standing alone against the might of the Axis powers in the West. Across the English Channel, the British people prepared for an invasion that felt inevitable during the long, hot summer of 1940. Prime Minister Winston Churchill rallied his nation with speeches that defied the defeatism spreading across the continent. The Royal Air Force engaged the German Luftwaffe in the skies during the Battle of Britain, denying the enemy air superiority. Pilots from across the Commonwealth and occupied nations flew Spitfires and Hurricanes in desperate dogfights. Their victory forced Hitler to postpone his invasion plans, indefinitely proving that the German military was not invincible. This was the first major check on Nazi expansion. While the war raged in the West, a different kind of conflict was brewing in the East between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. Despite a non-aggression pact signed in 1939, the ideological differences between the two regimes made war inevitable. In June 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history. 3 million German soldiers marched into the Soviet Union aiming to seize vast resources and eliminate the communist state. The sheer scale of the Eastern Front would dwarf all other theaters of war in terms of combatants and casualties. The Soviet people faced a war of annihilation. As the German army advanced toward Moscow, the bitter Russian winter arrived to aid the defending Soviet forces. Temperatures plummeted, freezing machinery and men alike, halting the blitzkrieg in its tracks just miles from the Kremlin. The resilience of the Red Army and the mobilization of Soviet industry began to turn the war into a grueling war of attrition. Entire factories were dismantled and moved east of the Ural Mountains to continue production out of range of German bombers. The Eastern Front became a meat grinder that would consume the majority of the German military strength over the next 4 years. Meanwhile, on the other side of the globe, the Empire of Japan was expanding its territory across Asia and the Pacific. Seeking resources to fuel its war machine, Japan looked toward the resource-rich colonies of Southeast Asia. Tensions with the United States escalated as President Franklin Delano Roosevelt imposed oil embargoes to curb Japanese aggression. The diplomatic stalemate led the Japanese military leadership to plan a surprise attack intended to knock the United States Navy out of the war. On the morning of December 7, 1941, Japanese carrier-based aircraft descended upon the naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a tactical success for Japan, but a strategic disaster that awakened the sleeping giant of American industry. Battleships burned in the harbor and thousands of American sailors and soldiers lost their lives in the surprise assault. The shock turned to resolve as the United States Congress declared war on Japan the following day. Germany and Italy declared war on the United States shortly after turning the regional conflicts into a truly global war. The vast manufacturing capabilities of the United States were now fully committed to the total defeat of the Axis powers. The Pacific theater presented a unique challenge with vast distances of ocean separating the combatants. The United States Navy and Marine Corps embarked on a strategy of island hopping, bypassing heavily fortified Japanese positions to capture strategic airfields. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 proved to be the turning point in the naval war. American dive bombers sank 4 Japanese aircraft carriers in a single day, destroying the offensive capability of the Imperial Japanese Navy. This victory allowed the Allies to shift from defense to offense in the Pacific, pushing the Japanese forces back toward their home islands. In North Africa, British and Commonwealth forces fought a back-and-forth campaign against the German Afrika Korps led by General Erwin Rommel. The Desert War was characterized by sweeping tank battles across vast open sands. The Battle of El Alamein in late 1942 marked a decisive victory for the British under General Bernard Montgomery. This success secured the Suez Canal and the oil fields of the Middle East while paving the way for an Allied invasion of Italy. The soft underbelly of Europe was now exposed to attack from the south. The turning point on the Eastern Front came at the city of Stalingrad on the banks of the Volga River. For 5 months, German and Soviet soldiers fought brutal close-quarters combat in the ruined streets and factories of the city. The German Sixth Army was eventually surrounded and cut off from supplies by a massive Soviet counteroffensive. In February 1943, the surviving German troops surrendered, marking the first major defeat of a German field army. The psychological impact of Stalingrad shattered the myth of German invincibility and boosted morale across the Allied nations. As the Allies advanced on all fronts, the full horror of the Nazi regime began to come to light. Behind the front lines, the German Schutzstaffel had established a network of concentration and extermination camps. The Holocaust was the systematic state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million Jews and millions of others deemed undesirable by the Nazi ideology. Trains transported men, women, and children from across occupied Europe to death camps like Auschwitz and Treblinka. This industrial-scale genocide remains one of the darkest chapters in human history, revealing the depths of cruelty possible when hatred is institutionalized. The air war over Europe intensified as the United States Army Air Forces and the Royal Air Force launched round-the-clock bombing campaigns. American bombers struck industrial targets by day, while British bombers attacked cities by night. The objective was to cripple the German war economy and break the morale of the German population. Cities like Hamburg and Dresden were reduced to rubble by firestorms caused by incendiary bombs. The strategic bombing campaign forced the German Luftwaffe to divert resources to defend their homeland, leaving their armies on the front lines without air cover. In the Pacific, the fighting grew more savage as the American forces closed in on the Japanese home islands. The Japanese soldiers fought with a code of Bushido that viewed surrender as dishonorable, leading to battles of annihilation. The capture of islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa came at a horrific cost in American lives. Kamikaze pilots flew suicide missions, crashing their planes into Allied ships in a desperate attempt to halt the invasion fleet. The fanaticism of the Japanese defense convinced American leaders that an invasion of Japan would result in millions of casualties. Back in Europe, the Allies launched the invasion of Italy in 1943, leading to the fall of the fascist dictator Benito Mussolini. However, the German army quickly occupied Italy and established a formidable defensive line in the mountains. The Italian campaign became a slow and bloody slog up the peninsula as Allied troops fought through rugged terrain and fortified positions. Despite the difficulties, the campaign tied down significant German forces that could have been used elsewhere. The liberation of Rome in June 1944 was a symbolic victory just days before the landings in Normandy. Following the success of D-Day, the Allied armies broke out of the Normandy hedgerows and raced across France. Paris was liberated in August 1944 amidst joyous celebrations by the French population. The German army retreated toward the German border, but launched a surprise counteroffensive in the Ardennes forest in December. The Battle of the Bulge was the largest and bloodiest battle fought by the United States in World War II. American troops held the line in freezing conditions, eventually pushing the Germans back and exhausting their last reserves. As the Western Allies crossed the Rhine River into Germany, the Soviet Red Army launched its final assault on Berlin. The capital of the Third Reich was defended by a mix of depleted army units, old men, and young boys. The Battle of Berlin was a chaotic and brutal struggle as Soviet forces fought block by block toward the Reichstag. Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his bunker on April 30, 1945, as the enemy closed in above. On May 8, the German High Command signed the unconditional surrender, ending the war in Europe. Victory in Europe Day sparked celebrations in London, New York, and Moscow, but the war in the Pacific was far from over. The United States government had been secretly developing a new weapon of unprecedented power under the code name Manhattan Project. Scientists led by J. Robert Oppenheimer worked in the desert of New Mexico to harness the energy of the atom. The first successful test of an atomic bomb in July 1945 changed the nature of warfare forever. President Harry S. Truman faced the difficult decision of whether to use this terrible new weapon. To avoid a costly invasion of Japan, Truman authorized the use of atomic bombs on Japanese cities. On August 6, 1945, the B-29 bomber Enola Gay dropped a uranium bomb named Little Boy on the city of Hiroshima. The explosion obliterated the city and killed tens of thousands of civilians instantly. 3 days later, a plutonium bomb named Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki, with similarly devastating results. The sheer destruction caused by these two weapons forced the Japanese Emperor Hirohito to intervene and accept the Allied terms of surrender. On September 2, 1945, the formal surrender documents were signed aboard the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II had finally come to an end after 6 years of global conflict. The war had mobilized the entire economic and human resources of the major combatants. It is estimated that between 70 and 85 million people perished during the war, making it the deadliest conflict in human history. The majority of the casualties were civilians who suffered from bombing raids, starvation, disease, and massacres. The aftermath of the war saw a complete restructuring of the global geopolitical order. The traditional European powers of Britain, France, and Germany were exhausted and economically ruined. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the two dominant superpowers with opposing ideologies. The wartime alliance between the two nations quickly disintegrated into distrust and rivalry. This tension would lead to the Cold War, a period of political and military standoff that would define international relations for the next 4 decades. In an effort to prevent such a catastrophe from happening again, the nations of the world came together to form the United Nations. The charter was signed in San Francisco in 1945, establishing an organization dedicated to international cooperation and diplomacy. The United Nations replaced the failed League of Nations and provided a forum for conflict resolution. While it could not prevent all wars, it established a framework for international law and human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted shortly after, asserting the dignity of every individual. The map of Europe was redrawn as the Soviet Union established a sphere of influence in Eastern Europe. Countries like Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia fell under communist control behind what Winston Churchill famously called the Iron Curtain. Germany itself was divided into occupation zones, which eventually coalesced into West Germany and East Germany. The city of Berlin, located deep within the Soviet zone, was also divided, becoming a focal point of Cold War tensions. The division of Europe would remain until the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. The war also hastened the end of the colonial empires that had dominated the globe for centuries. The weakness of the European powers and the rise of nationalist movements in Asia and Africa led to a wave of decolonization. India gained independence from Britain in 1947, followed by dozens of other nations in the subsequent decades. The rhetoric of freedom and self-determination used by the Allies during the war inspired colonized peoples to demand their own rights. The old imperial order was swept away by the winds of change. Technological advancements made during the war had a profound impact on the post-war world. The development of radar, jet engines, and rocketry revolutionized aviation and space exploration. The V-2 rockets developed by Germany became the basis for the American and Soviet space programs. Penicillin, which was mass-produced to treat wounded soldiers, transformed medicine and saved countless lives. The computer technology developed to break enemy codes laid the foundation for the digital age. The war accelerated innovation at a pace never before seen. Social changes were equally significant as the war challenged traditional gender roles and racial barriers. In the United States and Britain, millions of women entered the workforce to replace men fighting overseas. Rosie the Riveter became a symbol of female empowerment, proving that women could perform industrial jobs just as well as men. Although many women were forced out of their jobs after the war, the experience planted the seeds for the feminist movement. African Americans who served in the military returned home to demand equal rights, fueling the civil rights movement. The Nuremberg trials, held in 1945 and 1946, established the principle that individuals could be held criminally responsible for their actions during war. High-ranking Nazi officials were tried for crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. The trials exposed the full extent of the atrocities committed by the regime and set a precedent for international justice. The concept of following orders was rejected as a valid defense for committing genocide. This legal framework continues to influence international criminal law today. To rebuild the shattered economies of Western Europe, the United States launched the Marshall Plan in 1948. This massive economic aid package provided billions of dollars to help European nations recover from the devastation of war. The plan was designed to stabilize the region and prevent the spread of communism by fostering economic prosperity. It was a remarkable act of generosity that helped create strong democratic allies and laid the groundwork for European integration. The economic miracle that followed transformed Western Europe. In Japan, the United States led the occupation and reconstruction of the country under General Douglas MacArthur. The Japanese constitution was rewritten to renounce war and establish a democratic government. Land reform and the breaking up of large industrial conglomerates helped to democratize the economy. Japan rose from the ashes of defeat to become an economic powerhouse and a close ally of the United States. The peaceful transition of Japan from a militaristic empire to a pacifist democracy is one of the great success stories of the post-war era. The legacy of World War II is still felt in the world today in our borders, institutions, and technology. It was a conflict that revealed both the darkest depths of human depravity and the highest peaks of courage and sacrifice. The memory of the war serves as a constant reminder of the fragility of peace and the cost of tyranny. Memorials across the world stand as silent witnesses to the millions who gave their lives for a better future. The stories of the veterans who fought are fading as the generation passes away. We must remember the lessons of this global conflict as we navigate the challenges of the 21st century. The international order built upon the ashes of 1945 has maintained a relative peace between great powers for nearly 80 years. However, the rise of new tensions and the resurgence of nationalism threaten to unravel the progress that has been made. The history of World War II teaches us that freedom is not free and that vigilance is the price of liberty. We are the inheritors of the world they saved. As the sun sets on the beaches of Normandy, the waves continue to wash over the sands that were once stained with blood. The bunkers stand empty now, their concrete walls scarred by the passage of time. The silence is a stark contrast to the noise and fury of that fateful day in June. The world has moved on, but the echoes of the past remain for those who listen. World War II was the crucible that forged the modern world, and its impact will resonate forever.